Man, where do I even begin here? Path of Exile 2, in short, is awesome. This review is going to be me talking about my experience playing through this game, trying out a few different classes and getting to the endgame, messing around with it ever so slightly, and how I feel about being a new player to ARPGs. Now, I only played a small handful over my years of playing games, dealing with the grinding and the deep systems that come with it. I really didn't get into it until this game. So let's get started on this review of Path of Exile 2 after over 100 hours. Let's get started by describing what an ARPG is. ARPG, in short, just means action role-playing game, which most of the time these types of games are very similar in structure. They're top-down, action-focused, dungeon crawler, sometimes with hefty boss fights, sometimes not, but normally they just have a ton of loot and are primarily centered around combat. Your goal is to experience the story, but mostly experience the gameplay, as you level up your character, pick perks and passives on this massive skill tree. And for Path of Exile, you continue to dive very deep into the systems, augmenting your gear with drops and orbs and whetstones, and yeah, there's a lot. You re-roll your stats on them all the time to better serve your playstyle, and that's what these games are about. Picking up an ability or weapon, trying it out, making or finding a build that you want to try and test out and end up playing and enjoying. Then you do your best to obtain the best gear possible, allowing you to just mow down hordes of enemies or wreck bosses in a matter of seconds. Now, all of this is packaged in just a $30 early access. That's right, you heard me. Early access, but it's only 30 bucks. Now, with that $30, you also get $30 worth of cosmetic currency. So you can use it to buy things in the cash shop for cosmetics mostly. There's some other stuff in there, but mostly cosmetics. You can expand your stash, and I would highly suggest you do so. But the game is not fully released. Upon release, it will be completely free to play, just like the first one was. But considering the biggest comparison here is Diablo 4, which me personally, I bought the Ultimate Edition, which I know, the worst purchase that I've made in a very long time. That game was moderately fun for triple the cost. It was not worth it. Even at normal price without the special edition, you're looking at double the cost, in which you also have to purchase cosmetics and season passes just to even feel like you've done anything. Versus Path of Exile has those and is completely free to play. You're only playing right now for this early access to be able to play it sooner before it's finished. And the price is perfect for something of this exact scale and the amount of fun that you have. I do also want to hit a massive point here about the early access. So there are a lot of things that are not completely finished and are slightly buggy. Yet the majority of the guts of this game are here. Some of them are missing and incomplete, like classes, weapons, skills, passive zones, acts, crafting, endgame, yada yada. There's a ton, and I probably missed some there. But just know the developers are regularly updating the game, and they're also taking feedback into consideration when they do so. They've already made a ton of small and large changes based upon player feedback. Another early access thing that I want to point out is the founder passes. You can spend a lot more money on this game if you choose to do so, and obtain a lot of cosmetic items. But if you already did this in the original game back like 10 years ago, your items and statuses will carry over. They also plan to bring over any of the purchased cosmetics or earned ones that you got from the leagues or seasons from playing the previous game. Now, this will allow returning players from the first game to feel like they didn't just lose everything that they spent years working for, meaning that Grinding Gear Games, the developer, actually cares about you, instead of just making you pay for everything over again. Isn't it weird when a company isn't out here trying to just nickel and dime you to oblivion? Isn't that just crazy that we're happy about that? Anyway, that's the portion that I want to talk about for the early access here, and I'll bring it up casually throughout the rest of this review, but just know that it is early access and there will be some things missing. So let's kick off the next part, and that's going to be the story. Now, I won't lie and say here that I was engaged in the story throughout the entire thing, and that I loved it and it was awesome throughout its full length. And well, first of all, that's because it's not done. But second of all, I didn't really pay attention. So for me, I play these games, as most people do, for the combat. Now, that isn't because the game doesn't have a great story, because when I did pay attention to it in the snippets that I did experience, they were super well voice acted, decently written, and had some great moments. And from what I talked to with friends and I read more online, it just seems like we're sort of going with the flow, you know? The people that we meet along the way are taking us on an adventure to solve some problems, do the things, yada yada. Now we do end up getting led around the world to different diverse locations with unique enemies. It goes deeper into a lot of lore with some of the old gods and ancient civilizations, and again, they go on a grand adventure like you normally do in these games, and they have threads that are pulling you in all directions. I'm sure there are plenty of videos out there that will go much deeper and in depth in the story than I can with lore and everything else. So take your time and watch those videos or read up on it yourself. Sit back for a few hours and just enjoy it while you're grinding some mobs in the game. Now the story, as I said before, is not fully finished because it is early access, so expect more to come out in the future or as the game fully releases. Now when you're progressing through the main story quest, you can randomly come across side quests as well on your travels. Sometimes they have you backtracking to a previous zone, where you have to complete maybe like a combat trial or take an item to an altar for sacrificial means. Either way, you are rewarded for your efforts. You get upgrade materials or new items or even an extra perk point sometimes. Now sometimes these have to do with your ascendancy tree, which we'll get to that later, but those are pretty vital, so you need them to kind of build out yourself, and for the most part you want to seek them out and complete them as they come up. The main quests are also very fun with the bosses and unique enemy types that keep your attention for the most part. Every new zone and new enemy type, and fuck those leaping vultures, bro, they suck. Also fuck those enemies with the death explosions, they can suck my they can fuck right on off. Now you'll have to tackle these enemies in specific ways sometimes based upon your playstyle and fitting against the specific enemies that you're fighting. Then you have mini bosses and even final bosses of each zone that are honestly fucking cool as shit. I found myself smiling at pretty much every single boss encounter, although sometimes frustrating at the difficulty related to that certain boss and the class that I was using to fight it. It would force me to leave and return when I leveled up more or obtain better gear. But for the most part, out of those small frustrations, they're super engaging with unique mechanics to defeat them, allowing you to move forward on the next story beat, and with that, we will move on to the gameplay because the story is not something that I want to focus on. Now you start the game off by choosing a class, and you don't get to customize your character in the slightest or anything here, which at first did slightly annoy me, because I really enjoy making my character. In Diablo 4, man, my girl was gorgeous on there. Now you are kind of stuck with a specific base model for that class, but with Diablo 4 you can at least customize it to a degree. But here in Path of Exile, we don't get anything, and you get that character that you choose and you just keep fucking playing the game. But as you keep playing, you kind of realize that you almost never see your character's face or any of the customization that you created. Along with ever-increasing armor and glowy things all around you, then the character customization that you may have wanted at the start almost seems like a moot point by the end. Now I want to start the conversation, which is very long for the gameplay and the progression here, so strap in for a ride. Now most ARPGs that are out there allow you to use a click and move system, which is where you just click on a space in front of you and your character runs to it. But this one uses something a little bit different with WASD. You can still use the click to move because that is an option at the beginning of the game, and it feels just fine. But WASD is a game changer. Being able to move your character and be more direct in the movement while still using your abilities just feels so much better than clicking somewhere and your character just moves there on their own. You also have a dodge roll in this, which plays a significant part in the mechanics of the game and especially boss fights. Some bosses absolutely require you to manage this dodge roll properly or you're gonna get fucking wrecked. Now, every class can use every single weapon. Yeah, you heard me right. Even a ranger can go out there with a greatsword, your melee barbarian can use a staff and a wand, or any mix of anything that you want. But classes generally have specific stats that allow them to succeed with certain weapons with more efficiency. This is because each weapon does have a stat requirement to equip it, and you can equip gear and pick up passive perks to increase these stats. But based on level in specific classes, it's going to do a much better job with certain weapons due to its base stat allocation, and where you begin on that perk tree. We'll dive deeper into the perk tree in a moment, but as of gameplay, you can pick a few different skills or even just a single one that you feel fits your playstyle and work with it to make it the most powerful thing in your arsenal. Now at the start of the game, until you get your build online, you'll more than likely be using a smorgasbord of different skills. You'll be picking everything that you can see and just trying them all out. But picking and choosing things that just feel great, that allow you to kind of test it out, lets you determine by the end game that that's what you want to stick with. And by the time you beat the basic portion of the game, you'll have to be a little bit more focused on your specific skills to succeed and actually beat the bosses. Now, if you don't hone in on specific skills and you just kind of run with whatever, you're gonna get mowed over by enemies and bosses alike. The skills that you can choose from have a pretty wide variety, and they can also come from a mix of classes. I personally played the monk the most, which didn't really use any of the other classes' abilities very well, but I did play the witch, and when I played the witch as well, some of the skills came from the mage class. So not only would I summon my minions, I would get some AoE skills as well to work in there. But as for the monk, I started with lightning and I was doing pretty well at the start, but as I reached the end game, I had to research a new build and swap to ice. Because I was struggling quite a bit to get my lightning build online, but then I just realized it wasn't going to do enough. So I was able to spend a bit of currency in the game and respec to something completely new. And with this new ice build that I chose, man, I was mowing over everything in sight. Bosses didn't stand a chance, well, until they did. Because over time, the enemies do get incrementally harder from each zone to zone, meaning that your gear will be slowly outpaced by the level scaling of the enemies. Now, the enemies do remain the same level and difficulty within that mission or zone or whatever, so you can return once you've leveled up and obtained better gear, which I did have to, multiple times. You start off the game by only being able to choose from a small group of skills, and as you continue to progress through the story and go into those harder zones, you obtain higher level gems. Now these gems have skills and passives that you equip, and they allow you to level up either the previous skills that you've already obtained, or get new ones altogether. So you are constantly feeling that power creep where you're gaining new skills or enhancing the ones that you already have. The skill gems that you choose are actives, which means that they're skills that you press a button to activate, and then that's your primary means of combat. Then you have support gems that are right behind them, and as the name implies, they support the main skills. They can sometimes dramatically change them in unique ways, sometimes causing more damage or area effect or other dramatic changes that create a unique build just for you. The final gem here is the Spirit Gem. Now the Spirit Gems are basically just passives that take a reserve mana that's not a part of your main mana pool called Spirit. Now you do have to have enough spirit to be able to keep them active, but while they are active, they add another wrinkle to all of your abilities and skills, changing your playstyle even further. The best example that I can give for this is on my monk. My primary attack was an Ice Strike, which at its base is pretty simple. You smack somebody with your quarterstaff and it does cold damage. This cold damage can build up and freeze somebody temporarily, and that's about it. But with my support gems attached, I have it allow me to do more damage at the cost of area of effect, which as a melee skill, I don't really care about area of effect, right? So it works perfectly. My second support on it gives me more attack speed, meaning I can swing my quarterstaff even faster to do even more damage. But then my final support gem makes it to where if I land a critical hit, then it gives the enemy a debuff that makes it take more ice damage. Now, this is all attached to one specific active skill that I have, which is the Ice Strike. But you can see already that it does get very complicated very fast, but also fun with the way that you can dynamically change your build to fit your playstyle. The last part with the passives and the Spirit Gems, the one that I'll give the example of, helps you understand of how to get a build quote-unquote online, as they call it, which is just a fancy way of saying that your current build is working really fucking good. But the Spirit Gem that I got is called the Herald of Ice, which just means that I cause an enemy to shatter from ice damage once they're killed. It causes an ice explosion around them, causing even more damage and ice buildup to the enemies around them. But hopefully that gives you an idea of how this one specific build that I have for my character works. And of course, there are many nuances and many other skills and supports and yada yada that you can do throughout the entire game. But this one's just for my basic ice build, so it can get complicated and more complex very quickly. Now that we have covered the basics of classes, weapons, and the not so basics of the skills that are out there, let's talk more about gear and progression along with perks. Each time that you level up, you gain a perk point, which, as anyone knows from any time that they've ever even heard about Path of Exile, is a part of a massive, and I do mean fucking massive, skill tree. It has so many different things to choose from, it's fucking huge, that's what she said. For new players, such as myself included, you get pretty overwhelmed by, well, the massive size of it. Each class starts at a different point on the skill tree, leads them to more or less the right direction for their class specialization. You can redo these perks really at any time by respecking with gold at a specific NPC. There are also jewel slots that you'll find throughout the skill tree that allow you to place any type of jewel of your choosing into that perk tree. Now these jewels are items that you pick up and they go in your inventory, and they can be random mishmash of different skills and abilities and perks, whatever it is, that just give you a little bit more of what you want. Now they're not permanent, so you can actually take them out and rebuild yourself with these jewels in different small ways. But again, as you can see with the theme here, the game is more about just playing around with the systems any way that you want and for the sake of creating and having a fun build of your choosing. But next we have upgrades for gear. You receive items such as orbs, whetstones, armor scraps, and runes. All of these go to upgrading your gear in specific ways. Some can just augment a basic piece of armor to turn it into something that is magic, or even further into rare or unique. Now, the higher tier ones, such as orbs, are harder to come by, especially as they're the primary source of currency for trading in the game, but as you begin to stack these up over time, they allow you to roll different stats on your weapons and items to try for a new or better stat on your gear. Personally, I found it slightly annoying, but that's because at one point of the game, I sort of ran out of gold to be able to do this with, because you can buy gear from a vendor that's randomly generated whenever you purchase it, so you get kind of random stats that get rolled on it at the time of purchase. And you have to kind of just keep doing this until you get one that has the right set of stats on it just for you and the way that your build works. And by the time I did this and I kind of ran out of money from trying to roll the best stats on these, I bought like 20 quarterstaffs. I upgraded them and, well, I just ended up with the worst stats that fit for my build. It really didn't enhance anything, and it really didn't make me any stronger. If anything, the ones that I did end up choosing to upgrade made me weaker for the most part, so I wasted a ton of currency just to go nowhere, and this felt kind of bad. They didn't really synergize with me or my build, and I had to give up one of my coveted orbs to be able to trade with someone to be able to get the weapon that I actually wanted and needed to further progress the game, but it was worth it to keep it going. Now, I felt more powerful to mow down these hordes of enemies, but it took me down this path to deep dive into the systems, compare my stats with different skills and gear. It allowed me to choose an item or whatever that I was diving into to determine which one was working best for me. Now, this is a bit of a daunting task to ask for anyone, but if you find yourself loving the game and you enjoy what it brings to the table, then the possibilities to enhance your own playstyle and builds are almost endless. You can dig deep into the systems and hone that feeling of that build that you're enjoying the most. And even if you don't, you can just play through the story and then stop there, and that's perfectly fine. Because the further that you get into the endgame, the more complicated your build will get, and it will require you to kind of keep up with it just as much. Now, each class has a different dynamic skill set and weapons, just like the monk that I mostly played. Now again, just remember that each class plays differently and has a different dynamic skill set. You can choose to go with a different weapon and a different build that fits what you want, and they can be customized to your liking. So pick and choose a class and a style that works with you and play the game, because that's what it's all about. Now, the last thing that I want to mention here is the ascendancies, which are basically just subclasses for the class that you chose. They allow you to, say it with me, customize your build accordingly, just like everything else in the game. The systems in place are meant to allow you to just build whatever you want. Have it super focused in the way that you want it to be, which is fucking awesome. But sticking with the theme of the monk for me, since that was my most played class, we have a subclass that allows me to focus on elemental physical attacks, which is what I was already doing, so I chose that one. But the other one available is a little bit more tanky, has some chaos damage with it. Now, you can pick and choose these that you want to go with as you complete a trial at certain points in the game. Now, every class does have 2 currently, but they do plan to add more later, and also expanding the trees that come with them. But for now, they do a pretty good job of letting you, as I said before, hone in on that specific playstyle that you're looking for. Now, with most of the progression systems out of the way, it's time to talk about the endgame. Yeah, that's right. The endgame is where most players will be at this point now that we are a couple months after release. You run through these maps and you try to beat a pinnacle boss and you tweak your build to become ever so slightly better over time, and I spent a very small amount of time doing this. So I don't really have a very large opinion or want to talk about it too much here, but after chatting with a friend about it a good bit, they did a good job of describing it to me, stating that it keeps you engaged throughout the majority of it, where you work on your character and gear more, but it isn't really the most engaging part of the game. Coming across unique items and blowing up a room full of enemies is always going to be the core of this game, and maps just extend that to keep going. Yet you still just get more unique items and more enemies with more modifiers to fight them with, and then you get some special fancy bosses along the way. But if you want something more in depth or the end game of Path of Exile 2, that is not going to be the focus here, so I apologize if you came into this thinking that that would be the discussion. But if you do want a dedicated video from me in the future, I'd be glad to try to dig into it more and release that. Just let me know in the comments and we'll see what we can get done. But back to the rest of the video. As you can see, the majority of progression and gameplay was a large chunk of this video. But honestly, that's the biggest focus here, so I'm okay with that. Trying different items and builds and running it around until you get bored and try out a new one, or diving deep into the one that you like to make it shine. The choice is yours. Now, the next portions of this review are going to be much shorter as we round out the end of this review. The next part's going to be for world and environment design. And it really is just like most other ARPGs that are out there. They don't really do anything special or bold or outside of the box. A lot of gothic, dark themes with gross enemies and environments that hold them in. From a dark forest with a mushroom-filled cave to a barren desert with sandstorms. Ooh, none of these really blew me away. They do get the job done though, and the graphics are pretty delightful. Everything is very highly detailed, from the rain and the blood, guts, and gore on display to enemies exploding into a pile of bones and blood. Lightning cracks down from the sky, ice shatters enemies into tiny little pieces. All of these are done fantastically. Sometimes I even wish they cranked up the madness of these weird elements and just kind of went crazy with particles. But I do understand that they want the game to run well, which is why they don't do this. But also, the other enemies on the screen could be obscured with all of the explosions and sparks flying around. I get it. You won't have a clear view of the things around you or the enemies right in front of you. So speaking about how the game runs, well, it does require online to be able to play, which can make or break for some people. I found it slightly frustrating for myself since I did play it mostly solo, but I really couldn't when my internet was being a bit of an asshole, which it kind of does on the regular. It caused me to rubber band like crazy, and there were moments on the initial release where I would dodge roll into an enemy or terrain and just get stuck there. I'd have to reload the game or teleport away. Now, these have seemingly gone away for these small bugs and glitches, but I haven't really got stuck on terrain or anything as much recently, but there are some small instances of frustrations like this where enemies and skills can act up. Sometimes the enemies will hit you and they're not even near you, or their AoE marker is on the other side of the fucking map. I had another point where I actually showed it to a friend whenever I was playing, where I had that primary ice attack, and well, when I went into a certain zone, it just didn't work. It didn't do any damage, no ice buildup, it just didn't register anything at all. So at that time, I had to respec my entire class to another build because the one I was using before, my primary attack, it just stopped working. Once I left that zone, things were completely back to normal again though. And again, most of this was very early on in the early access, and I mean in the first 2 or 3 weeks. Now we are a few months down the road and things seem to have improved immensely. Overall, the game performs well, and even with these minor hiccups like this, they didn't really cause me to want to stop playing the game or need to do a hard reset all that often. Minor inconveniences like this really just annoyed me in the moment, but I easily understood it and overlooked it because, well, it's early access. Moving on to the audio design of the game, with the voice acting starting first, and well, when it is there, it's great. I've been pretty consistently blown away by many other developers out there that are finding voice actors that have good enough chops to make something that could be boring or basic not. It actually kept me engaged, and I rather enjoyed them bringing the characters to life. This game is not fully voice acted across every single character or interaction, but for the ones that are, they're treated with brief snippets of amazingly voice acted characters. The audio design overall with the music is massively impressive. Music rings throughout the game, and with each zone there's a score that keeps you feeling melancholic and somber. Yet you have your footsteps and the smashing of bones happening on top of it when you're engaging in combat. Now they layer these on top of the score and it becomes like icing on a cake. Every element sounds amazing. Now, I'm no composer or audio engineer by any means, but I know good stuff when I hear it. And the audio guys at Grinding Gear Games, well, they got some pretty good ears, and that's all I'll say. But overall, you will not be disappointed with the audio mix in this game and the music. Next up is the UI and menus of the game. Now, you will be in these menus a lot, and I mean a fucking lot. If you aren't plowing over enemies, then you're tinkering in these systems and these menus with the perk tree, the DPS analysis of your skills, your stash with all the unique items and orbs. You will need to get to know this UI and utilize it to its best. I think that the format that it's currently in is done similar to other games in the genre, and it really doesn't do anything special or outside of the box, but they do one thing in particular that I actually think is really fucking good. You can press a button when you're hovering your mouse over specific words in the menus, and it pops up a better meaning of that word to get a better understanding of exactly what it's trying to tell you. This way you aren't required to dig through a wiki page to fully understand everything. Now, you will probably end up using a wiki because this game has a massive amount of things in it that require a lot of explanation. But shout out to my buddies Taifu and Nix for this because they helped me with a lot of questions that I had when I first started the game. I was lost in the sauce for some of this, and I asked them probably 100 questions in the first couple of days. So thanks to you two guys for helping me a lot with this. They helped me understand a lot of the basics, and I didn't want to spend a ton of hours on YouTube videos and sitting in the wiki, so I really appreciate their time and effort to help me out here. But speaking of friends, let's move on to multiplayer. So the multiplayer aspect of this game is different. By that I mean I was expecting to see it be similar to Diablo 4, where you can see people running around all the time in these open areas, kind of like in MMO to a degree. But in this game, it's only in the cities, which there are a very few amount of. And in these cities, I want to say there's like a max of 30 characters within them. So you don't really get that feeling of it being a massive multiplayer game, and the only way that you really engage with it too much is if you invite your friends or other players into a party. But this allows you to go into a combat zone together with shared enemies and shared loot, and grind enemies and items together without getting in a party to experience. Though you can play pretty much the entire game without seeing another character for the most part, outside of those cities that I mentioned, of course. But I honestly didn't mind this at all. At first I thought it was kind of boring because it's a game that requires online and apparently has a massive multiplayer fan base. Yet I never really see people, but it does allow you to sort of play the game as you want. You don't have to worry about another player coming in and killing the enemies that you're after, or messing up a quest or dungeon that you're working on. None of that happens. Now, you do have to worry about your party members being a loot goblin, because it is all shared across the entire party. But you know, gotta choose your friends wisely before you go out there and try to gear up. But anyways, for the multiplayer is more of a, hey, it's there, but it's not really required. Instead, you can use it for more of a chat or for trading. And leaving it at just that is perfectly fine if you want to. Another small bit that I want to add here for the multiplayer is the difficulty. First off, in solo games, you can pause the game whenever you want. The server also pretty much instantly saves at all times to prevent issues. Now, this goes on to hardcore modes where things can sometimes get messed up, but it's almost never going to be server related for those problems, because the game will save and prevent that from happening. But as for hardcore, you play this mode if you're a fucking crazy person, and if you die, your character gets permanently deleted. Now, all jokes aside, I thought about trying this out, but maybe sometime later down the road, but there is a secondary mode that allows you to pick normal or hardcore, which is called solo self-found, where you cannot trade items and you cannot really do anything with other players, and you are relying on your own RNGesus to bless you with good rolls. And without his blessing, you are fucked. Good luck next time, brother. Alright, now for finishing off this absolutely massive review is my biggest positives and negatives of the game, which we will start off with the small negatives I have. And as a new player, it was a bit of friction at the beginning where I was trying to learn a lot more and I really felt like I couldn't. That's going to have to do with the tutorials that come in the game. It teaches you the very basics of the game, like equipping items and gear and choosing perks and so on. But after those basics, it doesn't really do a great job of explaining all the nuances between different types of gear stats or how orbs work within each other. Stats based upon substats and layering corrupted on top of it. Being almost required to stick with a wiki on your second monitor to understand everything. And kind of layering this on top of all the gameplay elements kind of sucks. So it does remind me of the old days where I used to play Warframe back 10 years ago, and that was a terrible time, but secondary for the next negative is going to be the UI. Now I know I did talk about it previously, but I want to point out something here that did bother me. And that has to do with your stash and the way that things kind of work with your inventory as well. So you can throw things from your inventory directly into your stash pretty easily, but the organization is what bothered me. Because with that, you have to pay real dollars, which really sucks, to be able to get a storage that organizes things more efficiently for you. Now, if you didn't have to pay real dollars for these and you could unlock them in-game or something else, it would make me feel a little better about it. I don't like that they take a simple UI frustration such as keeping things disorganized and they make it fixed or easier by using real dollars. Because navigating the UI in this game is already slightly tedious, so to make it better, you have to pay money. It just makes me feel a little off. But I do get it. It is a free-to-play game. They gotta make their money, they gotta keep the lights on, and the stash tabs are really fucking cheap. So I'm glad that even though they do make you pay for it, it's not a large sum of money that they're asking you to fork over. Also, some of the tabs that you bought from the first game can apparently roll over to this game. I'm not 100% sure on that because I didn't really play the first game. But I do want to point that out that players who are coming over from the first one, you do get hooked up a little bit, but then new players to this game just know that some of the stuff has some frustrations and things aren't as easy as they possibly could be right off the rip when you start playing the game. Now, the final bit of frustration that I have for this is the end game. They do take a little bit of time to explain the basics of it to you, but otherwise, you're really left to just figure it out on your own, which is not the worst thing in the world, but just a little bit more information would have felt a little better. Either way, not terrible, not a ton of negatives, just very small nuances that I wish were just enhanced a little bit. But as you can see, overall, really not that many bad things to talk about here. The ones that are there are very slight, so we're going to move on to the positives. Now, the biggest and best thing about this game is the developer, Grinding Gear Games. They are one of the most receptive studios I have ever seen, taking any and all feedback into consideration, working directly with the community to fix and correct things all the time. It's almost unheard of these days. Implementing changes at a regular time frame instead of waiting months to be able to fix some sort of bug or change a system that makes the game better, and shout out to the developer for being so open with communication and quick to implement all the changes. They update the community on the regular, they have long-term support going into everything, including the first game. They supported Path of Exile up until today. They still have updates coming out to it. And they're also allowing you to bring over a ton of the cosmetics that you purchased or earned in the first game. meaning that you aren't losing out on these, and all that time that you spent earning them is brought over, showing that they have a commitment to these players and they truly care. But secondary is, well, the players and the community itself. They are pretty damn helpful overall. There are a ton of content creators out there who make videos or guides or character builds or more. People in forums and Reddits that are constantly helping each other, the trade market being pretty fair, and people are not just trying to scam you at every turn. And the last part here that I want to talk about is, well, just the game itself. As you've heard me talk about throughout the course of this video, this game has a lot going on here, and the majority of it is executed flawlessly. From graphics to gameplay to systems and monetization, it's all done with a lot of thought and care. This game, which isn't even fully released yet, is leagues above Diablo 4. I use that game as a direct comparison, but as a new player to ARPGs who has played just a bit of them here and there, and never really made it fully into Endgame, I didn't take the time to dive deep into those systems. This one had me hooked from the beginning. It plays well, the bosses are fun, they're all well designed. The game overall is just a blast to play, and it's only $30, so if you have 30 bucks lying around, just check the game out. I've played it for over 100 hours at this point, and while I do have to put it down because I have other games to play for the YouTube channel, I will be going back to it periodically when new updates come out or when the full release comes. You will definitely see more videos from me. But that is going to be it for me. I hope you enjoyed this review from a relative newbie to ARPGs, and stick around to see some of the other games that I play. And of course, I would love it if you did all that YouTube stuff with a like and subscribe, maybe comment below about the feelings you have or corrections to things that I got wrong. But anyway, that'll be it for me, and I'll see you next time.